Hi, this is Kristen, and I'm going to continue talking about exocrine glands. Basically, I was so far have talked about the different ways to classify glands. I basically compared endocrine and exocrine glands. And then I went on and I talked about the type of exocrine glands based on structure. The structural classification is based on the shape of the part of the gland that does the secreting, and it's based on the arrangement of the ducts. Then I talked about how exocrine glands can also be, they can be classified based on the types of products that they produce. And I mentioned serous, mucus, mixed, and cytogenic glands. And now I'm going to talk about how you can classify exocrine glands based on their mode of secretion. And basically, that means the manner in which they secrete their product. The first type is called the Mammary gland. And the Mammary gland is also known as the Eccrine gland. And that's how we've been seeing it when we've been studying the integumentary system. We keep on seeing the Eccrine sweat gland. And those abundant sweat glands in your skin, those eccrine glands, release their products through exocytosis. They have vesicles, which is like a little sac, it's a little membranous sac of its product or sweat. And that vesicle moves from the inside of the glandular cell toward the cell membrane. It then fuses with the cell membrane and it releases its products into the duct. And so that would be a Mammary secretion. And in the image, they're showing the example being the salivary gland, but we also see this with the sweat gland. And here at the example on the right, you can see how the secretory vessel, which is a little dot here. There's this little secretory vessel, and it basically fuses with the cell membrane of the secretory part of the gland and releases the sweat into the opening, which then travels up the duct to the surface of the skin. A second mode of secretion for an exocrine gland would be the apocrine gland. And this is a special type of Mammary gland because it pinches off a part of the cytoplasm. So some people classified this as a type of Mammary gland because it's very similar to the previous one we looked at. But basically, in this example, the cell makes a little pinch right here, and it ends up pinching off a part of the cytoplasm that actually holds the product that the gland is producing. And this is what happens with a mammary gland. It's a special type of mode of secretion that we see with the breast milk. The third type or mode of secretion would be the holocrine. And this is when cells basically accumulate a product and then the entire cell disintegrates. And it ends up releasing the product that way. So the cells accumulate a product and then the entire cell disintegrates. So secretion, the secretion includes the product plus a mixture of cell fragments since the cell actually was destroyed. And examples would be the sebaceous glands or the oil glands of the scalp, also the glands of the eyelids. And the secretion is released at the expense of the cell. The cell is destroyed as it releases its product, and the cell itself actually becomes part of the secretion. So that was the third mode of secretion. You can see in this picture the sebaceous gland, for example. Sebaceous glands secrete oils or sebum, and they lubricate and protect the skin and the hair. And they happen to be Holocrine glands. So the glandular cell is destroyed after releasing its contents. And that brings me to some of the accessory structures of the skin. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up a different PowerPoint presentation or a different outline. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the accessory structures of the skin. Okay, so specifically in section 5.2, we talk about the accessory structures of the skin, which are hair, nails, sweat glands, and sebaceous glands. The sebaceous glands secrete sebum or oil, and the sweat glands are called Sudoriferous glands. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. Whoops. What happened? Hold on. Okay, see if I can get back to where I was here. All right, here we go. So, first, if you look at this picture, you can see the accessory organs such as the sebaceous gland. You can see the hair. You can also see the hair follicle or the bulb. So basically the hair follicle originates in the epidermis, and it can extend all the way into the dermis and sometimes the hypodermis. And it's basically a keratinous filament, which means it's made up of keratin, which is that tough, fibrous protein. Hair is basically made up of dead keratinized cells, and it really has no sensation. However, there can be sensory receptors that are connected to the root of the hair, but the hair itself offers no sensation. So the different parts of the hair include the hair follicle, the hair shaft, the hair root, and the hair bulb. Okay, so basically the hair follicle is something you can see. It's the epidermal penetration of the dermis. And the hair follicle determines the shape and the structure of the hair layers, which dictates whether or not the hair is going to be curly or straight. That's all affected by the hair follicle. The hair shaft is not actually anchored to the hair follicle. It's the part within the dermis. It's the part within the epidermis, and it's just below the surface of the skin. It can be exposed, so it's the part within the epidermis. That's the hair shaft. And then the hair root is the part of the hair below the surface of the skin, and it's really not visible. The hair bulb, which you can see in this picture right here, the hair bulb is the end of the hair root that is deep in the dermis. It includes dividing basal cells. So these basal cells are mitotically active because they're constantly dividing. And those dividing basal cells are called the hair matrix, which you can also see in this image. The basal cells, or hair matrix, produce keratinocytes, and they push new cells outward in the hair root as the hair grows, so your hair gets longer. The hair bulb basically surrounds the hair papilla. The hair papilla is made up of connective tissue, and it contains nerves and blood capillaries from the dermis. And the hair papilla is within the hair bulb. Now inside of the hair, like in a cross section, let's see if I can move to a different picture here. Just one moment here. In the cross section, the medulla is the innermost core. Some hair lacks this core, and it can affect if the hair is straight or curly, but the medulla is the innermost part of the hair. The cortex surrounds the medulla, and it's the outermost part. It's the layer of compressed keratinized cells, and the shape and structure of the cortex dictates also if the hair is straight or curly. And so we've heard those terms before, medulla and cortex, and we'll see them again. The cuticle of the hair is the outermost part. It's the outer layer of this very hard keratinized cell. And then the epidermal root sheath includes both the internal root sheath, which is the part that surrounds the root of the growing hair and extends up to the hair shaft. And then there's the external root sheath, which is basically an extension of the epidermis. It encloses the hair root. The external root sheath at the hair root is made up of basal cells, and in the upper areas it's mostly keratinous. So the glassy membrane is this thick, clear connective tissue sheath covering the hair root, and it connects the hair follicle to the dermis. And so here, you're basically looking at a cross-section of a hair follicle. You can see basal hair cells of the hair matrix in the center. They differentiate into cells of the inner root sheath, and the basal cells at the base of the hair root form the outer root sheath. So in this particular image, I'm going to go ahead and expand this for a minute, you can get a good look at the medulla, the cortex, and the cuticle. Okay, so what's the function of the hair, basically? Well, it protects. For one thing, the hair on your head protects the skin from the sun. The hair around your nose, your ears, and your eyelashes, they trap dust with allergens and microbes. The eyebrows prevent sweat and other substances from dripping into your eyes. Hair, even though the hair itself is not a sensory receptor, there is sensory innervation by a hair root plexus that surrounds the base of the hair follicle. And so it makes the hair sensitive to movement. So for example, if an insect lands on your hair shaft won't detect that, but if the movement causes the root of the hair to move, and there are sensory fibers attached to the root, you may be able to detect the movement of the hair. And you did something like this in lab. Another function of hair is thermoregulation. You can see in this image the erector pili muscle. It's a smooth muscle, so it's controlled involuntarily, And when it contracts, it can make your hair stand up on end, and it'll trap a layer of air between your skin and the tip of the hair, and that insulates you. And it's seen as goosebumps, so it is involved to some extent in thermal regulation. Also, hair can, believe it or not, serve as a source of communication, particularly in animals. It can communicate to others that you are cold if you have goosebumps, or if a cat raises its hair to appear large, it might show that it feels threatened, for example. So protection, sensory input, thermoregulation, and communication. Now, hair growth. Hair growth is basically, well, we all know we shed and hair and we replace hair. If you gain hair, then more hair is made than it's lost. And if you lose hair, which happens as we age, then more hair is shed than we produce. Hair loss can be a result of hormonal changes, which occur throughout the lifespan, dietary changes, and also aging. On average, people grow hair at about a rate of 0.3 millimeters per day, and we lose and replace about 50 hairs every day. When we grow hair, it typically happens in cycles, and it happens in 3 phases. The first phase is the Antigen Phase, the second phase is the Catagen Phase, and the third is the Telogen Phase. The first phase lasts about 2 to 7 years, and the cells divide rapidly at the hair root. The Catagen Phase, the second phase, it only lasts about 2 to 3 weeks, and this is kind of a transition phase. And then that last phase, the Telogen Phase, lasts 2 to 4 months. And during this time, the hair follicle is at rest and no new growth occurs, and then the whole cycle starts over again. Hair color? Well, hair color is due to melanin pigment, just like in our skin. And melanin is produced by the melanocytes of the hair papilla. And different hair colors result from different types of melanin, and that's genetically determined. So as we age, we tend to decrease the amount of melanin that we produce, and so our hair tends to turn gray or white with age. Okay, so I didn't go into too much detail, and I won't go into too much detail on your exam when it comes to the hair. I'm mainly interested in knowing if you know the basic functions and the basic structure, and the fact that, you know, it's an accessory feature of the integumentary system. Okay, nails. Now, nails are also an accessory structure of the integumentary system. And nails have a nail body, which you can see in this picture right here, the nail body. And the nail body is formed on the nail bed, and it basically functions to protect the tips of the fingers and the toes. It forms a back support for picking up objects. It's composed of, just like hair, dead keratinocytes. It's composed of densely packed dead keratinocytes, and it forms at the nail root. And you can see where the nail root is being pointed out right there. The nail fold, or the nail root, the nail root shown in that picture is where the nail forms and grows. And it's basically a matrix of proliferating or multiplying cells from the stratum basale. And the nail fold, which you can see the nail fold being pointed out there in the picture. That's on the lateral sides of the nail near the skin. So there's a lateral nail fold there in that picture on the left. And it overlaps the nail on the sides, and it helps to anchor the nail body. Now the nail cuticle The nail cuticle is sometimes called the eponychium. Right here, you can see it right here. I always refer to it as the cuticle, the part where the nail fold meets the proximal end of the nail body. And then the lunula. The lunula is that little moon. It literally means little moon, lunula. It's a thick layer of epithelium over the nail matrix, and it forms this kind of crescent or moon-shaped area. And then the hyponychium, or hyponychium, you can see in the picture on the right. It's the part that collects dirt if you claw the ground. It's the area beneath the free end of the nail. It's the most distal that contains a thickened layer of stratum corneum. And then, of course, you can see the phalanx. The phalanx is bone. That's actually, those are the long bones that make up the fingers and the toes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and erase all this. We talked about the nail in not too much detail. And now I'm going to talk real briefly about the sweat glands. The sweat glands are called the Sudoriferous glands. And you'll see right here that we're looking at a picture with an eccrine sweat gland. And it's called eccrine again because it secretes its substance in a certain way. It's the mode of secretion. It's a Mammary or eccrine gland that secretes its product through exocytosis. So here's the eccrine sweat gland, and it basically, the sweat travels up through that duct, and it goes through the pore onto the surface of the skin. The function of the Sudoriferous or sweat glands is to produce sweat to cool the body through evaporation. So the faster something evaporates from your skin, the better it will be at cooling you off. Sweat glands develop from epidermal projections in the dermis. And Mammary glands secrete by exocytosis through a duct. And that's exactly what this eccrine sweat gland is. It can be, you can call it eccrine or Mammary, but it secretes by exocytosis through a duct without actually affecting the gland cells. So, in the skin, there are basically two types of Sudoriferous or sweat glands, and it's based on the way in which the product is secreted. The first one is the eccrine sweat gland. It produces a hypotonic sweat for thermoregulation. So in other words, the sweat is mostly water. It doesn't have a whole lot of solute in it. It's hypotonic. It has some salt, it has some antibodies, and it has a trace of metabolic waste and even some dermacidin, which has antimicrobial proteins in it. And we have a lot of eccrine sweat glands. They're the most abundant type of sweat gland. They're all over the body, but they're particularly abundant in the palms of our hands, and the soles of our feet, and on our foreheads. But we have a lot of them. And it basically looks like that coiled gland in the dermis that I just showed you, where the pore opens at the skin. Now the second type of gland is more rare, and that is the apocrine gland. Now the apocrine gland is a human pheromone gland. It's actually the scent gland. It releases a human pheromone. And it's usually associated with hair follicles. So you would find it in your axillary or armpit hair You would find it in your genital hair. And so we have a lot of these apocrine sweat glands in the armpits and in the genital regions. And the axillary region refers to the armpit region. They are larger than eccrine sweat glands, and they're much deeper in the dermis. They can even reach the hypodermis. And the duct typically empties into a hair follicle before it reaches the skin. And the sweat's a little different too. It has water and salt, but it also has thicker organic compounds. And so the reason it creates a scent is because the organic compounds can be broken down by bacteria. And that bacterial decomposition releases an odor. And so that's why they're the scent glands. The sweat release for apocrine glands is controlled by hormones and by the nervous system. So that's why kids suddenly become a little more aromatic when they go through adolescence. They're having this surge in hormones. Okay, sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands is the other type of gland, the other type of accessory organ found in the integumentary system. Sebaceous glands secrete sebum, and sebum is a type of, it's oil. And they're found all over the body. And their function is basically that they lubricate and waterproof the skin and the hair. And they lubricate the dead, dry layer of keratinized cells of that stratum corneum that's always shedding off cells. They're associated also with hair follicles because the oil that we secrete basically lubricates and softens the hair and the skin. Oil is a whole bunch of liquids, a whole bunch of lipids mixed together. And the fatty acids in the oil have an antibacterial property, which means that it helps to create our acid mantle, our first line of defense against microorganisms that could potentially invade the body. And it also prevents water loss from the skin in the dry air. And also the oil glands become more active during puberty as well. So that's really all I wanted to say about the accessory organs of the integumentary system. So basically, we have now covered every part of Chapter 5, and we've covered every part of the epithelial tissue. And I'll have a separate talk on connective tissue that will be associated with Chapter 6, which is over bone.